So many times as real estate investors or investors in general, we jump into something and we really don't, we want to see the end so badly that we don't know what it quite looks like. So I learned the lesson. I just learned it when I was losing money.
Hi, this is Garrett Sutton, and you're listening to the Average Joe Finances Podcast.
If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you smash the like and subscribe buttons. If you're listening to our podcast, go leave us a 5-star review. All of our links can be found in the video description or show notes below. Hey, welcome back to the Average Joe Finances Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Cavaggioni, and today's guest is Dr. Phillip Hearn. So, hey, Doc, excited to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Mike, thanks for having me. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing splendid. Thank you for asking. Welcome to the show. I'd like to start these things off the same way I start every podcast episode, and we want to know more about you. So if you could, please share with us your story. Who is Dr. Phillip Hearn?
That's a great question. I'm glad to be here as well. Thank you so much for having me. So I am born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. So I am a Cardinal fan, so let's get that part out of the way now. I know the Cub fans will probably turn off the they'll turn this off. I apologize.
I'm a Yankees fan.
All right, my AL team's the Red Sox. We'll work through that too. I know.
Okay.
We'll figure this out. I know you're going to edit all of that out.
No, not at all. I'm leaving that in. I got a very good friend from St. Louis. He's going to love that.
Yeah, so there you go. So I'm trying to draw in your St. Louis viewers if we can help you. So born and raised in St. Louis. I went to high school here. Actually got a chance to be recruited to play football. I went to Millikan University in Decatur, Illinois, my freshman year. Only played a year of football, came back home, got my undergrad, my first master's at Webster University, my second master's at St. Louis University, and then I just finished my doctorate in education with an emphasis in leadership and management from Capella in December of 2020. So that's all the schooling, plenty of schooling. I think I'm done for the most part. So we'll see. Okay. Got started actually in business for myself when I was 17. So I had an interest in real estate. It actually started on a dare. My adoptive father at the time, I was wanting to do what most young men probably do, want to buy a fun car, right? So I wanted to buy a Jeep Grand Cherokee. I started researching. So I love the research aspect of everything I do. So I started researching the car, found a great car. Took it to my dad at the time. He never does this, so it stuck out. But he goes, "That sounds dumb." And I was like, "Wow, that was mean." But he goes, "Why don't you look at buying a house?" And just walks out of the room. So that actually the accidental way of getting me started on real estate and business ventures all these years later. So 20 years now in, it all started basically with a dare, right? So grew up in the area, started digging into real estate. I actually bought my first property when I was so that again seems like forever ago, about 17 years ago. I always call it the smartest, dumbest thing I ever did. Smart because it got me into the business world. Dumb because I was only good at putting holes in stuff. So if you need a demo, I was your guy. I was young and spry back then, right? Still a good back and could haul a bunch of stuff out of a property. So I like to say I've learned a few things since. Really grew up just trying to figure out what I wanted my niche to be. Did some fix and flips when I was younger. I've done everything from be a landlord to fix and flips to working with small, medium, and large investors on their projects, and then expanded into working with developers and larger general contractors to now having more of my own businesses and other kind of entities within the overall umbrella. So a quick 30,000 foot view to get everybody started.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to dive down a little bit deeper from the 30,000 foot view, but I want to point out a couple things that you had shared there that I think is very fascinating, and for my listeners to really just hone in on, is that when you first brought this idea of getting this new car to your father and you said, "Yeah, I'm thinking about getting like a Cherokee or something, like something nice," and he's, "Yeah, that's stupid. Go buy a house instead." I find that very funny because I feel like a lot of people, if they had that conversation with a parent, that they might not get that same kind of response, right? So I'm glad you got that kind of response because it got you thinking, right? And that's awesome. And getting into that and buying a house instead of buying that new car. You said you were what, 20 years old when you bought your first home?
Yeah, right around 20. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You got me beat. I bought my first one right before I turned 22. That's awesome, man. And just having that kind of mentality, though, that right away was like, hey, I need to buy something that's going to be to add value to myself and everything. And I think maybe the focus might have been a little bit different at the time. It was like, hey, buy a home for yourself, right? But I could see where you shifted that and you realized that the real estate itself is going to be something where you could get these assets to buy you the things that you want.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. And you started off, you said, doing like fix and flips and through the whole gamut of real estate, right? So going from that to getting into bigger deals, like big projects, and now with developments and things like that, touching all these different spaces of real estate. So I'm excited about that because I want to talk about what that journey was like to starting off in these fixes and flips to evolving as you went along. I also want to ask you what your thoughts are, especially being as well educated as you are, 2 master's degree and a doctorate's degree. You have a very good understanding of how the education system works, right? And how most people, when they're paying for their school, get kind of lost in some of those expenses and they don't really plan for that properly. So I want to touch on that a little bit and what your thoughts are. And actually, maybe we could start there. Let's actually start with that. Going through and getting multiple degrees. I'm not sure if you did student loans or if you said you played football. So I don't know if you had a scholarship or anything like that. But what was that process like? Like, how did you pay for your school?
So it was a mix of all of that, actually. So student loans, anything from Pell Grant to
Okay.
scholarship. I was also pretty good academically, so that worked out okay too.
Okay.
So
Good.
that helped some things as well. The one funny thing, and I know this is going to sound almost counterproductive, I would tell most people don't do what I did, which is getting this many degrees. Now, I'm lucky, and I'll give you the why both sides of the case. So for me, it worked out because everything that I majored in, so my undergrad was media communication. I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. I'll tell you the honest truth. I really wanted to be on ESPN years ago. So that was my overarching goal. It's like, if I can't play sports, I might as well talk about sports. So I grew up a big just fan of sports in general, football, basketball, baseball. My favorite athlete probably of all time is like Jerry Rice, right? I'm a big Joe Montana fan. I know everybody's a Tom Brady guy now. Montana's my guy. If I got to win one game, I take Montana, but that's a whole other set of story.
That's fair.
But all of that to be said, so I want to go into media. I want to be in sports broadcasting. My first master's was in marketing. My second was an executive master's in health administration. And then the last was the education with an emphasis in leadership and management. Now, to the outside world, that seems like a hodgepodge. It actually has helped me with my career, and I'll explain. Everything that we learned, or that I had an opportunity to learn in my classes and with my peers in media communication. So I've had radio shows, I've done sporting broadcasts. I loved all of those aspects, but it forced me to have to get comfortable with public speaking. So it's an indirect, direct benefit, right? So yes, I'm not quite on Sports Center. I missed it by that much, but at the same time, it's helped my overall life in terms of being comfortable speaking to one-on-one like we're doing, to crowds. So I was able to parlay what I had learned into my day-to-day life. The marketing masters, understanding marketing, sales and marketing to me, and to probably most of us, go hand in hand, right? So if you can understand how to market for what your clientele is, that's always a big benefit. So I had lessons of not only within the classroom, but then years later overall. The mindset of doing the executive masters in health administration is it forced me to be multiple, but it really showed me that even though I was studying something that I wasn't, let's say, an expert at, the things that I had started to understand previous to that master's, I learned that they all kind of touch, right? So there's enough experiences and similarities. I liken it to a playbook in football, right? So I could tell you to run straight down the field. In one playbook, that's a fly pattern, right? Another playbook, that's a fade pattern. Another playbook, it's a 9 pattern. It's all the same thing. It's just a little bit of a different verbiage. So as I was going through school, I was also working full time. I worked in telecommunications as I was growing my business. So I've done everything from the corporate world to the side hustle becoming the main, going to school the whole time, and then ending up with the doctorate. And so I started to learn that these experiences that I'm having are giving me more of an enriched life, right? Like I started to see certain things of how people looked at the P&L sheets at a corporation, how the balance sheet was looked at. What does that look like when you talk to a small business? And then the education with an emphasis in leadership and management for me, there's a couple components. One, I grew up around a ton of teachers and administrators. So I have a big propensity for being around people who like to share their knowledge, right? So that's fun for me to do now and pay it forward. Second, just having the understanding of education is all around us, right? So it's not just go and sit in a classroom. So I've done that for everybody, right? They don't have to do that as much as I did. But go and sit in the classroom, that's one form of education. The School of Hard Knocks, I've seen those things too. That's another form. Being willing to be around mentors or folks who are doing it bigger and better than you are. That's a completely different form, and probably the form that I'd recommend the most. For me, everything kind of touches upon one another. And that's been the fun part of getting today, looking back and seeing all the fun stuff that I've had a chance to do. And some days it has not been as fun, but I would tell most people, don't do all of that. Try to figure out those niches and those things that you like to do, that you have a passion for. And I also think it can be more than one thing. A lot of people just say, just do this one thing and that's it. But I've been lucky enough to kind of understand a little bit more about this, grow the real estate careers you talked about, but I was working in corporate sales at the same time. So that started to shape how I led later on down the life. Sometimes learning what you don't want to have happen is just as important as what you do. So they all helped to shape me to get me to where I am today.
Yeah, Doc, that is fantastic. I love how you describe the different forms of education outside of school as well, right? Like the different things you learn, like in the job itself, like as a real estate investor, you go out there, you make a mistake, guess what? It becomes education. It might become a very expensive education, might even
Yeah,
cost you as much as a degree, right?
maybe
But
more.
yeah, maybe more. But those are the things that, you really learn from because you don't want to make that mistake again. You want to make sure that you can get out ahead of those kind of things. And that's one of the things I love about the real estate space and just the people that I've encountered in the real estate space as well, because once has that same general understanding of how to properly educate yourself in the real estate space. And a lot of it, getting out there and doing it, making those mistakes, learning from them and getting better, or seeing what other people have done, the mistakes they've made, and avoiding that to make your own mistakes. I just had a guest on not too long ago. We were talking about why make those level one mistakes when you can get trained and learn from other people and you could just skip straight to level 4 mistakes, right?
Yeah.
Don't sit there and do those level 1, 2, and 3 stuff. And I was like, wow, man, that is really like something to think about and helps me understand. I feel better about the fact that I have a coach, that I use coaches, I have mentors, and I also coach other people as well. And it makes me feel a lot better about that because it is that piece that you get to accelerate a little bit as you grow, learn, and grow bigger in what you're doing. Speaking of growing bigger in what you're doing, I like how you described you were doing a lot at once, right? You're going to school, you're working in telecommunications, you have a side hustle that you eventually grew into the main hustle. So let's
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit. So you're going to school, you're working, you got a side hustle. How did that evolution work as you went from transitioning? You finished school, you're transitioning out of that telecommunications job and turning that side hustle into a main hustle. How did that look?
Yeah. So I'll start off with the initial reaction. It's one of the scariest things that I've done. And I say that in the most like loving way. I remember the day that I submitted my resignation to the last company that I worked for officially. And I was actually flying out to the West Coast, partially for business, partially for fun. And I was on the plane, like trying to just keep breathing, just breathe, just take a deep breath. Like it was all hitting me at once. I look back at everything that I've done to get to that point as necessary education, as you talk about. It was exciting, it was scary, it was all those things, right? So I definitely took that route of, okay, let me try to maximize as much as I can get out of the corporate setting before it's actually time to make that transition. But yeah, the during was a little jarring, but I'm excited that I did it. I'm glad that I did it. But I think there are some pieces that led up to that it just started to make more sense. And so being willing to step out there. And the second piece of advice that I would give the listeners is you have to block out the noise. And so here's what I mean by that. Funny enough, going back to the original story, my adopted father has very much worked in 9-to-5 settings for the most part of his life, right? Nothing wrong with that. And I know grandparents who have had pensions, and most of our listeners are probably like, pensions, what's that? We don't have pensions as much anymore in the pipeline. I've seen all that. And my adopted mom used to tell me, make sure you're staying at a job for a minimum of 3 or 4 years. When I moved from one telecom company to another, and I was having a friend look at my resume, they looked at my resume and went, what are you doing? And I said, what do you mean? You've been there too long. I was there for 5 years. And they were like, you've been there too long. So like the world had changed around me, even though I was getting the advice from folks who, again, are successful in their own right, but just a different type of success. I knew I didn't want to sit in a cubicle. I know my brain moves too much to just sit still. When I say block out the noise, you're going to have a lot of people, if you do decide to transition your side hustle into your main hustle, that are going to question everything you do. You got to be strong enough to block out that noise. So the closest thing I can think of, sales and business and everything that I've done, is as close as I can get to being back on the football field, right? When I would catch a ball, so I played wide receiver, quarterback, all the skill positions. But when I was a wide receiver and I'd catch a ball, only thing I could hear was me breathing. I couldn't hear anybody in the crowd. People could have screamed at me. They could have probably said a bunch of mean stuff when we were on the road. But all I heard was my breathing. I was able to block out that noise. So I tap into some of those experiences, those past experiences and successes to go, this is exactly what it's like to start a side hustle, run your own business, expand your business. Look at ways of doing that through acquisition. It's scary. Every step is a little scarier, but you start to feel more comfortable in your own skin to go, I can do this. I just need to now take my time, learn what it is to be where I'm trying to go. So block out the noise, and you're going to get it's going to be a little nervy to start with. But once you get over that initial fear, I think it almost turns into adrenaline if you do it right.
I absolutely love that. I absolutely love how you taking what you did in college playing football and using that to on the outside as well. Like you focused on what your mission was. So you were catching that ball and you were running to the end zone. That's all you cared about. You didn't care about the other noise. You didn't care about the people, especially when you're on the road booing at you and screaming
Yeah.
at you, whatever.
People are mean.
Block it all out. People are mean. People are mean, but people are also wonderful, right?
Yes.
And that's one of the things I enjoy about this journey of life that we're all on together is that sure, there's going to be mean people out there, but you're going to meet some wonderful and amazing people on this journey. And I've had the opportunity to do that. Even having you here on this podcast, this is amazing, right? Being able to have these conversations. I love the fact that we have this technology where we're 5,000 miles apart from each other, man, and we're having a wonderful conversation. Our paths may have never crossed previous to
Yeah,
this. And
absolutely.
I love that I get to share your story. And the whole blocking out the noise thing is what I'm focusing on right now because I see that in my own journey, right? When I said, hey, this is what I want to do. I'm retiring from the Navy, I'm getting out and I want to focus on my businesses and what I'm trying to build, right? And of course, you're going to have people saying, why do you want to do that? Why not just go get that government job that's going to keep paying you really well while you're collecting your pension from the military, right? So I do have a pension. So
Yes.
I got into one of those career fields where there was still a pension around. And actually, the military got rid of that. I got to be grandfathered into that because I'd been in for a while when they got rid of it. But it's one of those things it's really amazing because you start to see people for who they really are when you say, I'm going to do this business for myself. I'm going to do this and I want to go out and make this happen. And you'll see some people that will come out and really like cheerlead and have your back and say, man, this is fantastic. Go you, go you. And then you'll see some people that you thought might have been your closest friends say, you're crazy. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And it's so funny. It brings me back to, I think I saw this on Facebook or some social media site where it said, basically, you can start a business and you'll have more people that you've never met on Facebook or social media support you in your business, and you'll have
Yep.
family and friends that'll just be like, yeah, whatever,
Yeah.
and just downplay it. And
Yeah.
it's really amazing because that does happen, right? So I like what you're talking about with blocking out the noise because you have to. There's going to be naysayers. There's going to be people saying you can't do it. You got to block the noise and just carry on. And you did that. I want to talk about like how you were able to do that because there's a lot of people out there, myself included, that try to juggle so much and have a lot on their plate while they're juggling, right? And it takes one bad throw and you're going to miss that catch and you could just drop everything that's on your plate. So
Absolutely.
as you're going through, you realized block out all the noise. That was the first step. But what else did you have to do as you were transitioning that side hustle to your main hustle? I know it can't be easy walking away from a
Right.
career that you had,
Yeah.
but you had to do that. You had to give that up to grow. So what was that transition like after you started blocking out the noise? What did that look like?
Yeah. So before I even get into that, thank you for your
Sure.
service. I remember
Appreciate
reading
that.
that
Thank you.
about you. So yeah, appreciate all the work that you've done. I say the second part. So part of my personality, I guess I'll start there and I'll work to that second portion.
Sure.
I'm stubborn and I'm really competitive. So for me,
Great
I
traits.
yeah, I love it. I am probably that person though, when we play a game, I'm going to find a way to try to win. I'm going to try to win legally, of course, but I love that competition. And so I think for me, again, the transition of understanding that I'm not going to be 17 forever. That definitely played in my head. I'm 37 now, and I think I try to work out, but I play golf now. So I'm not quite playing tackle football like I used to back in the day. I don't know what that would look like right now. I found a way to be competitive and I'm covered. And so I try to use those as strengths more than detriments, right? So when I taught part of that block out the noise is you got to channel the energy, right? So that's to me the next step. When I was younger, so I have a biological family and adoptive family. And so some of those stories are, we probably would need something very strong in both of our cups to have a couple of these stories. But I'll give you the cliff notes. When you go through bad times, when you go through difficult times, I think it shows more of your character than when everything is great. And so I've had an opportunity to see, like you mentioned earlier, a lot of times what not to do, right? So everybody's looking for what to do and give me the blueprint. Sometimes you got to sit and be patient and really understand what you don't want to have happen or how to avoid these scenarios. So a lot of that too, it could be language, it could be whatever the case may be, any type of communication, but I try to channel that into any positive energy I can get. So something as simple as this, if I'm in the middle of a workout and maybe I'm having a crummy day, I try to use that workout as the thing that level sets me and goes, okay, once we're done with this, we're going back out, we're going to be fine. You're having a crummy day, take it out on the bench press, take it out on the heavy bag, whatever you got to do. So I've always been a big proponent of channeling the energy into something more positive, even if it's negative energy coming your way. Part of the transition, number 3, and you mentioned this previously, which is dead on, some of your biggest cheerleaders will not be the people you think. So get that idea of perfection and almost nirvana out of your head. I've had more people who, like you said, ranging from Facebook to mentors to folks that are not related or even best friends of mine over the years that have been the biggest cheerleaders for the things that I've done and even attempted to do and failed. That's the other key. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to always be sunshine and rainbows, but you'll be surprised the people that are actually keeping an eye on you, that are interested in what you're doing and are cheering for you. So it's going to be usually outside that normal sphere of people. Last thing I would say is there's no such thing as perfect, right? There's never a perfect time. There's never a perfect chance to jump into something. There's never going to be like this perfect invitation all the time to do certain things that you're at least interested in. So if you'd have told me when I finally decided to turn in my 2 weeks notice, I had thought about it for probably 6, 12, 18 months beforehand. I just finally did it. And so if I was looking for perfection, let's say 6 months after was scary, it was unsure, it was not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Looking back, I could do that in my sleep now, but it took me a long time and a lot of runway to get to that particular point. And I think we do ourselves a disservice of looking for just straight perfection. I've always said, and I say this all the time, there's no such thing as perfect. I'm not a perfect person. Now, I try to be high quality, high standard. I want to be surrounded by high standards of people. So like you talked about, those great people in the world, but perfection is not, in my mind, I've just never used it as a real thing because I think perfection becomes a crutch. And if you allow perfection to become a crutch, you never start anything. So those are those other bigger points that started to lead me down the road that I went through.
Yeah, again, absolutely love that with perfection being a crutch, because if that's all you're focused on is trying to get things perfect, you're never going to get there.
Yeah.
The other part of that, and you alluded to this, you were talking about how your cheerleaders, like your biggest cheerleaders, are there even through your failures, right? Those failures are a stepping stone to your success, right? So
Yeah.
when you have those people that are cheering you on, even in those moments of failure, even in those moments where you feel like, I don't know how I'm going to do this anymore because I can't go any further, and you have those people that lift you up, that is probably one of the biggest things, and help you get over those hurdles and continue up that staircase and that ladder of success.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that's huge, man. And you started this off by saying channel the energy, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's huge because that's what you need to do. You have to channel the energy. You have to you have to put your energy towards those things that are going to add value to yourself and to
Yep.
those around you, right? And that's what's going to help you be successful. And that's exactly what you've done, and that's what you've been building. So that's fantastic. Now, I want to ask you, now, as you're going through this entire thing, right? You've realized what you needed to be successful. You've channeled that energy and you channeled it into real estate, right? So how did you how did the whole thing start with real estate? What was that first deal like for you? And how did you get into fix and flips?
Yeah. So first deal, I actually lost money. Lost quite a bit actually.
Okay.
And so the funniest part was I was so excited to start. I was actually going to work on this. It was going to be during the college summer opportunity to work with some friends, right? So I get all these guys together. I get about 4 or 5 guys together. They're all gung ho. We're ready to go. By week 3, it was 3 of us. So the first 6 of us were all ready. By week 3, it's 3 of us. By week like 5 or 6, I think it's just me. And they're all like, all right, see, we're going back to school.
Oh
So
no.
not only did I not make money on the deal, I had guys fleeing left and right. They were like, oh, this is hard. I'm out. And so, like we talked about, you start to really see true characters of people in those tougher times. And so I went, okay, got it. They were still some friends for a while, but I was like, okay, I got to kind of look at you differently. But at the same time, it was still good for me to understand it. I had an investor that bought the property that was here in town, really nice guy. But he was like, hey, it's this. I understand you bought it for this. So he actually kind of walked me through the process of the other end. So many times as real estate investors or investors in general, we jump into something and we really don't, we want to see the end so badly that we don't know what it quite looks like. So I learned the lesson. I just learned it when I was losing money. So I was
Right.
very locked in on like, okay, I need to understand this. Like you said, I don't do this again. Right.
Education piece right there.
Whew, I'm telling you, it's more expensive than college. Don't go to college. Just start doing some of this stuff.
There you go.
But yeah, so that first deal fell on my face. Started to make adjustments of what I needed to do to be more successful. The one piece that from now or from then until now that stands out for me is proper delegation. So for me, the best that I've done. So again, I'm stubborn. I gave you this earlier, right? I know myself. I've taken all these personality tests and all that kind of stuff. So part of that, I'm a bit of a driver, but I know that's partially stubborn. And so when you're younger, you try to do everything yourself. You just go, okay, I'm going to do it all. It's going to be me. Now I've gotten better and I've started to grow based on this is proper delegation, finding those subject matter experts, finding those folks who know what they're doing. So this could range anybody to being an accountant, a lawyer, a mentor, someone who may be willing to show you some of those pieces. Can't have the expectation because they might also see you as competition, but you're hoping you get those great folks that say, hey, come along with this. Why don't you be a JV partner? So let's get you through the process, right? Great construction managers, the contractors, if you're going to be doing the actual fix and flip. So really finding those folks that you can manage the process as opposed to having to physically be the person putting holes in stuff like I used to be. So I try to avoid that unless I just need to let off steam, but I'm like, we're doing demo today. Great. I'll be there. So other than that, trying to properly delegate has been one of the ways that I've been able to grow from those early moments of losing money to not losing as much over the years, which is good.
Okay. Yeah. Again, that's all lessons learned as you go through the process. And it's a thing of beauty and pain at the same time, right? Because as it's happening to you, it's painful. And then you look at it in the future, you look back and say, I see the beauty in this. I see what I was able to learn and what I was able to accomplish as I was going through this. And one of the things that you had mentioned that you learned, which is fantastic, is proper delegation, right? This is one of the things that I think we all learn the hard way for whatever reason. No matter how many times people tell you, you need to delegate, like you can't try to do everything yourself. I don't know why we're so stubborn. I know I was too. I had so many people telling me delegate. I'm like, no, I got this. I got this. And then you realize like how much time you don't have until you start delegating and you're like, wow, I start getting some of this time back. And it's like, why wasn't I doing this the whole time from the beginning?
Yeah.
So that's huge, man. And another one of those things to hit home, right? Now, as you're going through this process, again, you learn so much as you're going through. You're doing these fix and flips. And then you had mentioned how you're learning more as you get into JVs and real estate syndications. Like you were able to get pulled along and learn from other mentors as you grow. Now, that first deal that you had, I guess an experienced investor came in behind you and showed you the ropes, which is fantastic. It sucks that you lost money on that first deal. But what you gained from that was far more valuable when you got to learn why you were losing that money, why it was a better deal for him that way, and why he wouldn't buy it at the higher price point. So he's explaining that to you and you get a better understanding. And now you're like, oh, I've learned from this. I could take this into my future deals, which you did, right? Now, how did you go from doing the fix and flip piece? I know you said you got pulled along into JVs and syndications and stuff as you were learning, right? But what was that transition like when you decided to say, okay, I want to maybe go more towards the multifamily route and stop doing these fix and flips? What did that look like? Or do you still do both?
So I still do both. So it just
Okay, great.
depends on the project. Part of the reason I do both is because I also have my real estate license here in Missouri. That's
Awesome.
another one of those pieces too, where I'm a big proponent again of it sounds like it's so much more work, but if you understand, for instance, when you're buying and selling, you also understand how to work with your clients who may be buying or selling. So again, it's all those common experiences. So I actually got into more multifamily working, more kind of procurement management, that type of world. A mentor of mine came to me. So one of many mentors I've had. So that's another thing I will say. Full mentors is okay. I've got mentors for life. I've got mentors for business and just ways of doing things. So I'm a big proponent of mentors, coaching. I also do coaching and consulting myself, so we'll dig into that. But a mentor of mine comes to me and he goes, so tell me more about what you're doing. And we're chit-chatting. And he says, have you ever set up your MBE or minority business entity certification? And I said, no, what's that? And so he tells me. And so I start digging into that via state of Missouri website and all of that. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm a minority, right? This works out well. I own the business 100%. What kind of opening and opportunities may come from setting this up? I start working with developers that are working on LIHTC or low income housing credits, tax and housing credits here in Missouri. I start understanding more of that world. I start working more as their procurement management or their process manager more than anything else. So anything from procuring materials, heavy equipment, even labor in cases where I had contacts in the network that we could set them on the job sites and actually perform the work. And it started to really elevate how I looked at a deal. So doing a fix and flip, 1 or 2 doors, it's a whole different mindset than when you got to juggle 50 to 100 doors in a ground up build, right? And so not even owning that, but working with those developers, really understanding their pain points. Why are they frustrated here? Is there a better way to be more efficient? So again, I'm a very big research. I like to call myself affectionately a research dork. So I like to understand what makes people better. Part of my background is I have a black belt in Six Sigma. So even though it's complicated matters in some cases, I like to think from point A to point B. How do we draw that straight line? And so working with these developers, seeing those first 3 to 5 developers, those pain points, I started to then create packages that work with them to say, okay, we can help you with the materials. Here's how we would roll this out versus what you all do. Same thing with heavy equipment. We can go out and do that. You can rent it from us. We can help you purchase it. What do you need us to do? And so now it made a single family project that much easier. Because my thought was if I can do 100, 150, 200 door ground up build with this developer who's getting their phone blown up and they've got all these different team members and my team and I are keeping track of them, we can go do a 2,000 square foot fix and flip. So it just all started from having a conversation with a mentor and saying, hey, have you ever looked at this certification and have you decided to pursue it? And there I went.
Yeah, it's amazing what a conversation can do. Just having the right person speak the right words to you can change your life. And that's one of the reasons why I tell people, like, when you network, really get to know the person, build a relationship. You never know what that person might be to you in the future, what value they might add to you, what value might add to them.
Yeah.
And if you always have a mindset of, I want to add value to other people, you're going to do well, because as you're giving back, you're going to get so much more back in return. And one of the things that I like that you said, being a Lean Six Sigma black belt, right? You said, how do we get this straight line to get from point A to point B? But as you're describing it, you're explaining how, like, that line is not so straight, right? There's all these different pieces, different directions that it needs to go before it gets to that end. And as you're going through it, you realize, okay, how do I streamline this so that the line isn't going like such a deep turn here and a deep turn here? How do I narrow that and make it straighter? And that's one of the things that, as a real estate investor, that you learn to do over time, that you put these systems and processes in place to be more efficient and get better at your craft. And I think that's awesome, the way you pointed out and describe it. It isn't always just about getting from point A to point B. It's how do we get there efficiently that works for everybody that's part of this puzzle, right? You can't just put pieces together that don't fit. You have to find the right fit. So I think that's huge, man. Absolutely. And that goes back to that proper delegation piece that you mentioned earlier, right? Having the right people in the right job. Yeah. Okay. Now you're talking about, so you've gone from fix and flips to all the way from ground up development, and
Yeah.
you still do the fix and flips, right? And you bring
Yeah.
that same energy that you bring to development to a fix and flip. And I love that because you treat every transaction like it is the number one thing that you focus on. And it has to be that way, right? You have to treat everything the same, and you bring the right energy with you, man. So I think that's absolutely amazing.
Appreciate it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Hey, Doc, absolutely, man. I want to transition this into something that we call the final round. It's where I'm going to
Okay.
ask you the same 4 questions I ask everybody that comes on the show. They're hard-hitting questions. I think I know what some of these answers are going to be just based on your personality and your strong vision moving forward. I think I know how you're going to react under pressure.
Okay.
Let's get this thing going.
Let's
All right,
do it.
Doc, the first question I want to ask you is, what's the biggest mistake you've ever made in real estate?
Wow. Is it bad that I've got more than one? I'm going to narrow it down to one because I
Sure.
want to play in the rules of the game. But I've made enough mistakes that our viewers wouldn't have to make most of these. So let's say the biggest mistake when I first started, especially, is I did not understand real estate law well enough. Now, I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV, but at least having those working aspects of how to properly write a contract. What are you trying to do? Give yourself the correct out clauses. I had no idea at all. So that has definitely been something with, again, proper delegation. I've got my legal team and all that stuff in place, but understanding real estate law and all the minutia that kind of is below the surface that you never would think about, that was probably my biggest mistake early on, just not having a working knowledge of that.
That's fantastic. You know what? I think that's the first time I've gotten that answer. A lot of times with real estate investors, it's usually always the same. Like it's a lot of times it's, oh, I wish I would have started when I was younger, or hey, there was this one deal where I did this and this happened. I really wish I wouldn't have done that. Wow, that's pretty cool. So understanding real estate law. And that's a huge one. That's a huge one because I think not understanding some of that probably leads to even bigger mistakes. Some of the other ones that you were thinking about throwing up there. So that's
Yeah.
awesome. All right. So
Yeah.
the next question, Doc, ties into this one. And it's, what is something that you've learned that you wish you knew when you first started?
To give yourself some grace that you're not going to know everything day one. There have been so many times, especially over the last 5 to 10 years for myself, that I will be doing something else. And the answer to what I'm trying to figure out that day, that week, even that month, come to me completely out of nowhere. So I'll give you a quick scenario. So this is a little broader than real estate, but it's still within that realm. So one thing that my team and I have expanded into is acquisitions, right? And so growing through acquisitions of businesses. Now, as far-fetched as that sounds, like the opposite of real estate, there's so many similarities, it'd make your head spin. But I wanted to figure out, I was looking at stuff that I'd put together, nice bases. Okay, this is great, but I'm trying to figure out, how do I pick up the tempo of growth? And so I was playing golf one day with a friend of mine. He started talking to me about a contact of his who bought for them. They bought businesses, they sold off the assets, and then they pocketed the funds, right? So these are usually businesses that were in need of a turnaround. So if they wanted to turn around, they could keep folks in place. They decided, like a less crazy version of the whole Wall Street Gordon Gekko kind of vibe, right? So a little less overdone than that, but that was the idea. And so I started researching more about what does that look around working with turnarounds. And then I started realizing, okay, as opposed to me trying to build a ton of things from, why don't I purchase a business? Because I understand enough business acumen, right? Like I tell people if I know it because I've studied it, or you can talk to me like a 5-year-old and help me understand it faster. So why not pick up a cash flowing company, attach it to what you're already doing, and now you don't have to reinvent the wheel and grow this thing from complete scratch. So you get a bunch of the assets potentially, or inventory and all the things. So long story short, you have to give yourself grace because sometimes the answer is not right in front of you. We all want the answer now, and especially, I know we both grew up in like the dial-up era, right? So our internet made a bunch of noise and woke up our parents in the next room when we were in the computer room. Now we got stuff on our phone that is fast. But even with all of that research and all that information, sometimes slowing it down and almost being more concise with what you're trying to do, I think it definitely helps. So it's giving yourself some grace to know that it may take a moment, you'll get it, but it may take a moment. It may take longer than what you're wanting to have happen.
Yeah, no, awesome answer, because I feel like a lot of people have this, and it also has to do with the technology that we have today. But people have this, I want that instant gratification. I want that instant
Yes.
answer. And it's as easy as me saying, I don't want to say it right now because my phone will wake up by saying,
Yeah, right.
"Hey, Siri," saying that and just getting an answer for something, right? Oh, and
Yeah.
it's still, even
And
when
it
I
woke
whispered,
up.
it still picked it up. Look at that.
Yeah, it
So
hurt.
you get like this, I want to get that instant answer. I want to go on Google and just type in like, hey, what do I got to do to do A, B, C, and D? Or what do I need to do to have a cash flowing business? And sure, you'll find all this great and free information. But if you don't know where to pick up those pieces or where to start, and you don't take your time in researching what it is you're trying to do, you are in for a world of hurt and losing a lot of money. I think it's
Absolutely.
important that we learn from other people's mistakes so we don't make them ourselves. And that's why I believe in having a coach and learning from somebody that's going to hold you accountable. I think that's huge, man. I think that ties into what you were saying. So I definitely appreciate your answer and the transparency there, man. It's definitely refreshing.
Absolutely.
All right. Hey, so the next question, again, this kind of ties into the previous two questions.
Yep.
And it's, do you have any tips or tricks that you would recommend to someone that is just getting started today?
Wow. So I'm trying to put myself in today's world, right? So I know how competitive I was even then. So one thing that I would definitely say, so I will knock it down to three things.
Okay.
I'm talking about the instant gratification piece, right? Instant gratification. Some of the greatest things that have happened to me have not been instant gratification. Some of the dumbest things that have happened to or around me have been due to instant gratification. So sometimes I get it. We want that, and that's great from time to time. But if you're really trying to build something that is long lasting, almost legacy building, if you're into that mindset, put aside the instant gratification, be willing to do the research, be willing to work through the steps that it takes to get yourself where you want to go. I would say second, reading about the material or about the subject matter that you're trying to achieve. Some of my favorite books, and they range. I know we'll kind of about some of those in a second. I'll tell you one that is not on my list coming up. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. There's a book by a gentleman named Reginald Lewis. And the name of the book, it should hopefully make you laugh a little bit, is Why Do White Guys Have All the Fun? So I'll tell you the quick backstory. Black male, grew up, I believe, in the 40s, went to school in the 60s, 70s. I'm sorry, late 40s, early 50s, went to school in the 70s, bought. So the crazy part is he was a part of business acquisitions. And I don't want to ruin the story, but I'll tell you one of the big portions. He actually did purchase. It was his only business he purchased, but he purchased a $1.5 billion with a B valuation business, right? And this guy he understood law, he understood real estate law, he understood business law. He did all the prep work. And to a lot of people, they would go, we only had one deal. Why do you only have one deal? This deal was a monstrosity. And it's not like he didn't try other deals for whatever the reasoning. They just didn't get across the finish line. But if you mean to tell me your one deal is worth a $1.5 billion valuation, enough where he could buy a jet of his own. Let's just say it like that. And it's not even so much the material thing, but it's the buildup of how he gets to that point. That to me is one of the must reads of mine. And I actually just picked that book up about a year ago. So being willing to do that research and kind of grow from there. Third is surround yourself with good and people who are smarter than you. I tell people all the time, I love to be the dumbest person in the room. And I know that's counterintuitive to what we're used to, but I have been so lucky and so blessed to be around folks who not only are way smarter than I am on a myriad of subjects, which I love. They normally can't beat me in sports though, but we'll deal with that later. But other subjects, but also willing to share their knowledge. So I'm a big proponent of paying it forward. If there's information I get, I like to share it with my team. I like to share it with contacts. I like to share it with a group because my theory has always been if I'm good, I can also help make others good. So like you talked about being in coaching, working as a consultant, working as an advisor, that's a part of it. I'm an adjunct professor here in town at St. Louis University. That's one of my ways of paying it forward. So any of those opportunities, being in circles that on the surface would maybe intimidate you, but again, it's that adrenaline rush, right? You got great people willing to share information, willing to share knowledge. And again, they might even become your biggest cheerleaders. So whether that's mentors, coaches, advisors, some of my favorite people in the world have been former teachers of mine, adjunct professors, middle school teachers. I kept in touch with a lot of different folks. So being willing to put yourself in those scenarios where you can learn a lot just by being in the room. Sitting sometimes and being quiet is one of my favorite things to do, and let people just talk. And I get to ask questions later.
Yeah, that's awesome. If I could be a fly on the wall in Warren Buffett's investing room where he has his thoughts. But but seriously, like going out and meeting people, going to events and just hearing other people speak and seeing how other people have done what they've done and accomplished what they've accomplished in life is just one of those things that you really can't put a number on that when it comes to the value that it can add to you. And I think
Yeah.
that's probably one of the biggest points of what you're saying. Yeah, and that's amazing, man. Now, you did mention a book there, but I do have this final question here where I'm going to ask you, do you have a favorite business, investing, or real estate related book or podcast or both?
So podcast has got to be this one, hands down. I know it's a shameless plug, but I'm giving you the plug, so don't even
I
worry about it.
appreciate you. I
It's a
do.
done deal. So the two books that I recommend, number one is Becoming Your Own Banker by R. Nelson Nash. It is one of the most it is the easiest read, in my opinion, and it's one of the most underrated books possibly of all time. If you can understand that book and take that information and use it in all of the potential opportunities that you come across, I think it's 84 physical pages, like the actual book is 84 pages. It's the greatest 84 pages I've ever seen in a book in my whole life. I read it probably once a year just to keep like some of the thoughts in my mind. So Becoming Your Own Banker by R. Nelson Nash. And I will say Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I'm sure you've had people say that. I think what it does though, you got to get deeper than the name cachet, right? Everybody knows Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, but it really teaches you how money moves if you're paying attention at the smaller, minute details, right? So it tells you from, hey, you're going to be taxed in a certain way if you're bringing in an income, if you own other things and it's more passive, how do you get more to that side of the matrix? You'll see it in the book. But I think the deeper meaning of how you start to utilize money, I think it takes away a lot of the fears that we all have naturally when we're told, hey, debt is always bad. It's not as bad as you think. Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki and Build Your Own Banker by R. Nelson Nash. I cheated. I gave you two.
And that's fine because both great recommendations. Rich Dad Poor Dad is that foundational book that really gives you those basic principles that will help you in any business, not just real estate, but in any business, understanding the difference between these assets and liabilities and how to have your money work for you, how to employ your dollars, I think is huge. So I want to share something with you. I bought my kids a game and it is now their favorite game, but we bought the Escape the Rat Race for kids, right? The cash flow game for children. And they absolutely love that game. And they keep asking, when can we play again? When we can play again? So Friday nights is usually our game nights, but they want to play again. So we might play earlier this week. We might even play it tonight because they really enjoyed that game. So yeah, we busted it out for the first time last week and they really enjoyed it very much.
It's a better version of Monopoly. That's how I look at it.
Oh, 100 times better because it really helps them understand it, right? It helps them understand why they have to pay these liabilities whenever they hit the money symbol and how they're getting this passive cash flow and the difference between those, what you're getting for the amount of money that you put into a security, what you're getting for the amount of money that you put into real estate, and what you're getting for the amount of money that you put into a business. And some businesses don't even get you anything. So that's huge, man. I love playing that with the kids. Okay, that wraps it up for the final round. But I do have one more question for you, Doc, and it's the most important question of all. Because people are listening to the show right now and they're saying, man, I really what Doc Hearn's putting out here. Journey going through this whole thing was very genuine. And I want to know more about him. So where can people find that information about you? Where you'd give a website you could share with us, social media, anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So website and actually a book. So I became an author during the pandemic. So one of many things going on. So first the website. So go to phillipspeaks.com. So Phillip with two L's and then speaks with two S's. So phillipspeaks.com. There, folks can reach out to me doing public speaking, consulting, coaching, advising, whatever you need. Gives them a little bit of a snapshot into my world, what my team and I do. And then they can reach out to me and set up some time to get on my schedule. So phillipspeaks.com is number one. The name of the book is Life Models for Success, Simple Words to Transform Your Life. So what this book is about, I've taken actually 21 of my favorite mottos, and they've come from all over the place. So there's a famous football head coach's motto that's in there. It'll actually make sense if you watch football. From mottos from my mentors, my adopted mom, my adopted grandma. So I've got 21 of them in there. Very quick read, but it was something that was a labor of love for me. So I've had friends over the years say, you should write a book. So I wrote a book. So that's the book, Life Models for Success, Simple Words to Transform Your Life. It is actually on Amazon now. You can get it in Kindle. You can get the physical copy. Either way, it's a quick read, but it's something that was a labor of love for me. So I was glad to do it.
Fantastic. So I was going to ask you, where can we find your book? So that's great. So I'm going to make sure I have all those links in the show notes, make it easy for our listeners to either click or copy and paste away. Just again, don't do it while you're driving, guys. Okay. Hey, Dr. Hearn, this has been absolutely fantastic. This was a great interview. I had a great conversation with you. I learned so much. I got a whole page of notes down here, man. This really was a treat. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, to my listeners, thank you so much for joining me and our special guest, Dr. Phillip Hearn, on the Average Joe Finances podcast. Go leave us a 5-star review and tell us what you liked about today's episode with Dr. Hearn. Hey, I really appreciate all of you. I hope you have a fantastic day, and aloha from Hawaii. Thank you for making it to the end of this episode. Greatly appreciate you being here with me today on the Average Joe Finances podcast. If you haven't done so yet, make this the episode that you go leave us a 5-star rating or subscribe to our YouTube channel. The Average Joe Finances podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Have an outstanding day.